Next up is Susan Rohde. Susan has been telling story on stages for just a few years, but she, in those few years, has had so much success and enjoyed 4 Moth Story Slam wins. Susan works in higher education and enjoys the opportunity to help young people reach their academic goals. She also co-produces Tellers Night in Forest Park in partnership with the Forest Park Arts Alliance. She's a proud graduate of Northwestern, go Cats, and follows their football team. Her wonderfully blended family keeps her busy and brings her great joy, and so does storytelling. So please come on up, Susan.
It was a spectacular August evening. The air had cooled and there was low humidity and a beautiful breeze, and it was just way too nice of an evening to stay home. So I grabbed my then 9-year-old son for an impromptu low expectations evening at Kittyland. Now, a low expectation evening means 3 or 4 rides, slice of pizza, home by 8 o'clock. So we were just coming off the tilt-a-whirl. I was already a little disoriented, but I noticed all this commotion going on, primarily around my son Danny, and people were like picking him up and hugging and laughing and crying, and I was speechless. And finally, the spokeswoman for it was this large Hispanic family around my son, and finally the spokeswoman for the family, Aunt Carrie, Titi Gotti, introduced herself and explained that she was Danny's long-lost aunt. And she went on to explain that when Danny's dad was shot and killed, Mom took off with the kids and she never knew what happened to them. And she was so excited to reunite with him and was talking about all the abuelas and titis and cousins who wanted to come over and visit, and he could wait. I was like, stop. I swear I had no words to explain what I was feeling. So God gave me the words that I needed. I'm sorry, I gotta go back a second. I was not by any means feeling her excitement. Danny was our first foster child, and our plan was to adopt him. That was always the plan. The agency had picked him out for us because he was in a category of foster children called likely eligible for adoption, meaning that he wasn't at that point, but the courts were moving in that direction, and the plan it was crystal clear. He would live with us for a year, parental rights would be terminated, we could adopt him, and live happily ever after. That was the plan. Titi Gotti was never part of the plan. So God did give me the words that I needed, and I said, I'm not going to interfere with Danny seeing his biological family if that's what's good for him. But he's a foster child, so I need you to get a hold of the agency and do whatever they want you to do before there's going to be any visits. And she's like, oh, that's fine. And she's hugging me and she's hugging Danny. I'm like, Jesus God. So you can imagine the next day I called the agency. I was beside myself. And she said, you know what, don't worry about it. When biological family realizes they have to do background checks, fingerprinting, they are not going to follow through. Don't worry about it. I said, okay. Oh my God, I swear within 2 weeks, the entire family, and I'm talking about 3% of Humboldt Park, was fingerprinted, background checked, ready to visit. So we invited them to our house, which probably sounds goofy, but my husband and I were trying to control any part of this that we could. So they came over, and honestly, there was abuelas and titis and cousins. I don't know how to say cousins in Spanish. And even Danny's biological brother and sister were there. And quite honestly, it was one of the most beautiful days of my life. It was so obvious that they adored Danny and that he adored them. And I was so happy for them, but I didn't know a lot about foster care at the time. But I knew the judges would always go with biological family as opposed to this goofy suburban white couple who thought they could raise a Puerto Rican kid from Humboldt Park. So I was so sad, but I wanted what was best for Danny. So they were getting ready to leave, and I was saying goodbye, and Titi Gotti walked over and said, I will always respect you as Danny's parents. You so obviously love him, and I would very much like to be a part of his life, but you will always be his mom. Oh, so I hugged her this time, and Danny is 33 now, and we have remained very, very close with Titi Gotti and her family. I've watched her kids grow up. She was so good to our kids. This is a whole different story, but within a couple years, we took his brother and sister into our home as well. So we had this whole little Puerto Rican vibe going on out in Forest Park. But boy, talk about destiny, and rather than a burden, what a blessing. I do a lot of storytelling, and I like to talk about foster kids because I want to get the word out. Foster care is not for everybody, and you can't dabble in it. But there are so many other ways to get involved. I guess that's the message. There is such a need for mentors, for respite workers, to take my kids for the weekend and give me a break. Those are the kind of workers, and I know I'm not advocating that you take my kids. No, I'm just saying that's what a respite worker does. So fortunately, I have someone who takes the kids for the weekend. And there's also something called CASA workers, court-appointed special advocates, who make sure these kids are protected and their rights are being respected. So if your heart is open to it, there is such a tremendous need. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Okay.